listening to She Shield, your one-stop shop for all things personal safety. I'm your host, Sofia, and my goal is to help educate women and men on concealed carry, martial arts, and all topics self-defense. Today we have Eli Knight from Knife Control Concepts and Knight Jiu-Jitsu on YouTube on the show. I would love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself and your background that has led you to where you are today, if you don't mind.
Well, I'm Eli Knight, and most people know me from YouTube, I guess, at this point. But I've been doing jiu-jitsu for, it's around 30 years now. I've been training martial arts and primarily jiu-jitsu for that long. And I started out in striking arts. I've done striking arts the entire time. It's just that I focus more on the jiu-jitsu side of things. And I guess what a lot of people know me for is that even though the most prevalent aspect of jiu-jitsu these days is the sportive side, I am one of those guys that also, is still focused on the self-defense aspect of it. But, I still do like the sportive endeavor. And I'm also kind of a weird one too, that I do a little bit more of the weapons focused as far as the knife control concepts like you mentioned. And that's a really important thing to me as well. So, that's kind of where I'm at. I just love all things martial arts related, self-defense related, grappling related. I also hate a lot of those things too, but I'm really a big proponent of a lot of that stuff. So I just try to put out as much good information as I possibly can. And that's about it.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I definitely enjoy when you all can introduce yourselves because there's no way I could get in, the kind of the multifaceted life that you have going on. So today I have a few questions for you concerning jiu-jitsu, both sport and self-defense. And it actually that's the first question. How would you say your jiu-jitsu training differs when you are practicing for sport as opposed to self-defense and vice versa?
Well, that's something that I try to help people with a lot because there's, I get the questions a lot of I train at primarily a sports school, but I want to do more self-defense stuff without having to go somewhere else. Is there some way that I can curate my training or cater it to making it more self-defense oriented, even though I'm in a more sportive environment? And I get kind of both complexions of that question. So it's something that I've really tried to put some thought into and really, because that's kind of what I've done over the years too. I've had the luxury and privilege, I guess, over the years to be around a lot of people who have similar mindsets as I do. It's every aspect is important to us. But again, most people, you go into a training environment and you're going to learn, this takedown, this guard pass, this positional control, this submission, whatever. And, there may not be contextual discussion about hey, if you're in this environment, you're in a parking lot, you're in, there's a weapon involved, there's more than one person, those kind of things. But, I think that at the crux of it, there's a lot of fundamental elements that are going to be consistent with throughout all of that training environment. As far as you're still going to have to understand how to go hands-on with somebody. And that's at the base of it. And as far as there's a lot of things that people think that this modality is just different. Whenever it's not just different, it's harder, or it's more complicated, or this is not as complicated. And so it gets a little bit convoluted talking about it in abstract terms, but I do try to help people as far as I can with trying to modify their training in whatever way that they want to be able to feel more complete as a martial artist or as, in self-defense aspects or whatever. The sports side is just, it's more fun. It's more fun. And there's also more tangible results that you get. That's why the sport has really eclipsed the self-defense aspect of it. Because if you go into a training environment and you're with other like-minded people, and it's well, what are we training for? Well, if you're training for self-defense, it's a pretty abstract concept. Because how do you know, what's the goal here? Because I don't know when I'm going to get into a fight in a parking lot or get attacked by somebody randomly. I don't know what day that's going to be, if it ever happens, right? And hopefully it never happens. But I know that if there's a competition coming up, I know that there's a deadline. Then there's actual fundamental things that I can follow as far as prepping for that competition. Or I know if I'm going for my next belt or promotion or stripe on my belt. Those are solid guides. Those are solid like landmarks that I'm pursuing. So it's a little bit more ethereal whenever you're training for something like self-defense or overall, defensibility in your life. But I think that at the end of the day, though, you're training to be a more complete person. You're training to fulfill something in you that is empowering in you, that makes you feel safer, that makes you feel like you can defend yourself, that makes you feel like you can fight. And ultimately, it's going to, develop in you a pervasive sense of self-confidence that is going to be able to apply to a lot of different elements of your life in totality, right?
Right. No, that's wonderful. That was beautifully said. Yes. It makes a lot of sense. And kind of what do you tell people when they come to you and they ask you how they can start shaping their training to be more like one or the other? Is there anything you specifically say or even train at your academy?
Yes, I think that for the most part, the first thing to start with is to realize, when you're training, when can I get punched in the face? Because that's not something that in a purely sportive training environment that you have to worry about, right? And purely grappling. So that's why,
Right.
I think something like the advent of combat jiu-jitsu as being kind of an intermediary between like, just strictly grappling and MMA. That's why I think that's a really cool kind of thing that has become popular. But you can do things like that. You can test yourself. I remember a long time ago, like when I was in my early days of training, I was so preoccupied with, will this is this usable in a fight where there's no rules, that I wouldn't allow myself to get put in places, or I would try my best to stay out of places where I was vulnerable to get punched or whatever. What really happened was it stunted my jujitsu growth, because once I gave myself a little bit more freedom and ability to say, okay, look, I'm not going to be as concerned about that. And I'm just going to move through these positions. I'm going to make my transitions. And if, I could get punched in the face, well, he's not really going to punch me right now. I'm not going to get punched in that grappling competition. I'm not going to get punched in training. So I'm going to move through, and then I'll go back and clean it up, later. So I think the main thing is you have to be able to really develop that lens and recognize that, be aware of that. So I think that the biggest thing is to not allow you, be aware whenever you're training that you could be developing some training scars that would leave you vulnerable if the context changed to more of a self-defense situation. Because I use the example of there's certain positions that are a little bit more beneficial or advantageous in a self-defense situation. Because think about from the perspective of like if you're a law enforcement officer and you're making an arrest, you've got the suspect prone, but you've got a position that's really good. But that position that's really good in training in a strictly grappling environment, it's leaving vulnerable the suspect's access to your tools that are on your belt or on your kit, and it's leaving you a little bit more too target fixated on the person and not circumspect enough to be able to tell if there's other people involved in the environment that might be getting into the situation. So you have to have that ability to be able to not only try to hold control, detain the person, but you also want to be able to keep a little bit of a surveillance around of other environmental factors. So that's a very difficult job, but it all kind of starts from a similar place as far as how do I just control this other human being? How do I control their movement? How do I control my balance, my posture, my structure? How do I manipulate theirs? And do it by taking as little damage as possible on my end. And then everything kind of builds out from there. So a lot of it's personal responsibility as far as how to really curate your own training. But a good coach should have the ability, I think, with a student or somebody they're working with, to not sell them a bill of goods and say this is a one size fits all thing. You're coming into our school, and I know our school focuses on, we're getting ready for a competition, and we focus on no gi submission grappling, or we focus on gi jiu-jitsu for like IBJJF rule sets, or we are a judo school or whatever. A good coach should say, these are the things that you're going to get from us that's going to really benefit you in your job or your pursuit of self-defense or your whatever. But these are some things that you need to be aware of, and you need to curate your training accordingly. And if you think that training here isn't going to really benefit you to the maximum ability, a good coach needs to have the wherewithal and the release of ego to be able to say, maybe you're better suited going to this place down the road that focuses a little bit more on the self-defense aspect of things. And that's a hard thing on both parts. But it's not supposed to be easy. So.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you for that answer. That's incredibly insightful, and also kind of just brings up the discomfort behind training in general, and also like what it is to train multiple things at once. It can kind of be overwhelming, but ultimately it's going to be more applicable to life. So I absolutely love that kind of balance there. And so you talked about how involving striking in your training has kind of changes the way you train. Could you also speak to how adding in weaponry changes training, and kind of, if you'd like to throw in your story of knife control concepts and how you got involved with that here as well, that would be lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. I've come from a background that was fundamentally concerned with the self-defense aspect of things. And by self-defense, I mean, it's a no rules environment, like violent encounter. How do you keep yourself as safe and protected as possible and take the least amount of damage and get out of that situation as unscathed as possible? So, whenever you're talking about that, you have to realize the nature of violent attacks. And we're not talking about an ego fight where, a guy and I have a disagreement at a bar and we step outside to settle it. It's more along the lines of, this is a no rules thing that I tried to avoid the situation, but it went sideways in the worst ways possible. So when you think about the scariest things that could incorporate, then, if you just go to some jiu-jitsu classes and all you learn is grappling, and you and another person decide to square up one-on-one, even if you don't know how to throw a punch at all, you're probably going to do okay. It's possible that you're going to close the distance, get the person on the ground and strangle them, and you're going to be all right. Maybe you get hit a little bit, probably don't get knocked out. You're going to be fine. But that's might be a very different story if there's more than one person involved in the situation, if there's a potential for weapons, even if there's no weapon produced. If it's an environment that's a little more chaotic, there's obstacles around, there's other things. So having said all that, the importance of understanding, well, what if a knife were there? What if a gun were there? What if a club or some kind of impact weapon were involved? What if more than one person were involved? Then, that changes the complexion dramatically, and it's so I've always, to some extent or not, trained with those concerns. And it might not be at the forefront. It might be something twice a month that we really focus on specifically, or depending on where it was in my training career, it might have been something that's the primary focus. And then the more sportive stuff was secondary. But again, I've had the luxury to do this for a very long time and to be able to kind of, develop understanding of these different modalities, I guess. So whenever I was approached to do an instructional video, and this was back when I was with Funker Tactical for a period of time, and I was asked about how does a knife being involved, like an edged weapons environment, I guess is how we phrased it, how does that change the complexion of what grappling looks like? I'm like, okay, that's an interesting topic. Now, we had a little bit of miscommunication because what they were asking me about is how, if you had a knife as the grappler, what would it look like? And I'm like, no. I'm not trying to put out an instructional about how to more efficiently murder people.
Right.
That's not my interest at all. Right. So, so if we want to talk about from the self-defense side, I'm unarmed. We got into a fight. It got into a grappling environment, and then a knife was produced because, it's a little bit of a luxury of if a person pulls a knife out and shows it to you, and it's like, hey, I'm about to stab you. You can handle it a little differently than if you go hands-on with somebody and it's already chaotic and strikes are being thrown, you clinch up with somebody, and whether they didn't have either the ability or the intention to draw that weapon at first, now they have, and now it's in the mix, and now shit has gone as sideways as possible. So now, what does that look like? And especially on the ground, because nobody was talking about that topic. I didn't see anything of real substance prior to that. And if it existed, I apologize because I just didn't see it. And I did a lot of research. And it's something that I had already trained in the past. I just never really thought about tackling that topic. And I don't like to put stuff like that out on YouTube just for lots of issues. So long story short, I tackled this project, and we made this. It was like we called it bladed grappler. I don't like the name, but that's what it was. And we put that out, and it was very well received. We did a second volume, and it took it a little bit farther into the discussion, and it was overwhelmingly extremely well received. Of course, you have the people who in a public forum were more like, oh, well, that's just that's suicide to try to grapple against somebody with a knife and yada yada. But you're always going to get some idiots that don't even train commenting on things like that. So this, I guess I became, people started to recognize me and know me for this, and were interested in getting my thoughts up further on the topic. And so I started to do more seminars, more classes, more things like that. And when I developed whenever I met and started to develop a friendship with Aaron Giannetti and eventually Mike Chaney, then we had very similar interest in that regard, and they were already doing phenomenal work coming from a Krav Maga and a grappling background. They were doing great work as far as that goes, and they were interested if I could kind of join in the group and help flesh out the ground portion of it, the ground grappling portion. And I was ecstatic to do it and to be part of that process, because I think that they're absolutely brilliant guys doing some phenomenal work. And so whenever we all got together and were able to collaborate on this, and we still are collaborating to this day, because it's a topic that is so what knife control concepts has evolved into at this point is something so unique, but not unique in the sense of, well, it's cool because it's different. No, it's cool because it's the most practical approach I've ever seen to dealing with the potential for a knife attack, or a knife being in an already hands-on kind of attack. And all the bullshit aside about, well, if somebody has a knife, just run away from them, or just shoot them, or just whatever. Giannetti actually has a great series of videos where he answers internet lightning round comments, and he just addresses them like rapid fire, and does a phenomenal job at it, because they're pretty easy to rebut or refute on a lot of the most common ones. But that aside, as far as actually dealing with something that's going to build into you, that's going to install the kind of mindset and physical responses that you're going to need to survive an encounter like that, I think that this training system is phenomenal. I mean, I'm obviously not saying that because it's mine. I get to be a part of it, and that's a privilege to be a part of it. But I think that Aaron and Mike are just absolutely brilliant guys. So it's an honor to be able to collaborate with those guys to make something this fantastic. The reason that it's such a good thing is because it's grappling based. And that's the thing I tell people is, like, whenever they say something about grappling versus somebody with a knife, and that being a weird idea, the thing I point out first is literally every stabbing happens from grappling range. You can't stab somebody from 6 feet away, unless you have like a spear. I don't know. But, if somebody's going to stab somebody, it's in proximity to clinch range. And the most natural thing that happens, the most natural thing that happens in that range, if somebody has a weapon and it's recognized, is, oh shit, I've got to grab that arm that has the weapon in it and try to keep that pointy end out of me as best as possible. So we're building off the whole, from the jump, it's off of the most natural instincts possible. Now, the rest of it is basically wrestling. I mean, it's wrestling and jiu-jitsu. It's grappling arts, because, while we do address the idea that striking plays its part, is this last go around that we worked on, we spent a good section of the course of the weekend dealing with shirt grabs, jacket grabs, posting, headlocks, framing, while the other, and using that while you're stabbing on both ends of it, on the defensive end and on the aggressor end, and seeing how that changes the complexion of it. And overwhelmingly, front loading the flow sequences that we do as far as the chain wrestling and the grappling, everybody was overwhelmingly successful at taking as little as damage as possible, even when the posting, the grabbing, the clinching, all that stuff was involved. And then once getting the person to the ground, well, why would you take the person to the ground? And you could say that about any fight, honestly. Like there's so many liabilities, but there's liabilities standing and staying in the fight, period. So, in for a penny, in for a pound at that point.
Right.
So once, if you're really going to subdue this person, if that's what you have to do, and it's not just about a matter of like, getting to a position where you can disengage from the situation and run away, you really have to subdue this person because the situation requires that. Well, you better know how to control somebody positionally. You better understand the nature of where there's strong movements. What are positions where you can control in, and what positions can you not control somebody effectively in. And then that changes quite a bit too, to actually get back to the question that you actually asked.
This is perfect.
It changes it pretty dramatically whenever you have a lot of, again, really good positions that get a little hairy whenever you introduce a knife, you introduce a weapon to the situation. And one of the main reasons for that is because once you get to a little bit more an advanced level in grappling, or a more proficient, I'll say, level of grappling, you start to understand that the way you're going to control somebody is typically by understanding how to control them from the core. So controlling their hip movement, controlling their shoulder movement, controlling their alignment, their structure, all these things. And it's about the core more than anything. Controlling their head, when you get into certain positions where that doesn't matter nearly as much, because this free arm over here, even though the rest of my body is completely like controlled and incapacitated almost, this free hand can do all the damage that I need to have done, because all I got to do is stick you a couple of times and then everything's over with. So now you have to decide how you're going to shift that focus. How am I going to maintain controlling this person and controlling the strongest movement that they can make, hindering their mobility, but simultaneously being able to control the weapon-bearing limb, preventing things like hand switches, preventing movements that can really give them the free range of motion to be able to effectively stab me repeatedly, especially. So, there's a lot of considerations that have to go into it. But what we found is the framework that we've really been working to develop has done an extremely effective job at that. And it's not one of the best things about it is that we're not presenting this as this is the system that is going to this is what you do, step A, B, C, whatever. It's a training system. This is a framework for getting you to drill. These are drills that you put yourself through that are going to develop the ability, the wherewithal, their concepts. And that's why it's knife control concepts, because it's conceptual, it's principle based. It's not just a step 1, 2, 3 process and now you're safe and you didn't die today. So that's the kind of training that I prefer to do. I tell people quite a bit that techniques, they matter and they don't matter. Ryan Hoover was making fun of me the other day for this analogy, but I'm sticking with it. And because I equate it to a Zen saying that I heard a long time ago of like, and the saying was Zen is like soap, but I'm going to say like Jiu-Jitsu is like soap. And in the sense that you take the soap and you lather up with it, but your hands aren't clean until you rinse it away, right? So the idea with that, the way I apply it to this, is that those techniques, that's what those techniques are. They're the soap, but once they're just the delivery system for the principle themselves, right? So the techniques are good and they're valid and they're legitimate and they're I think I said valuable already, but they're valuable because they're delivery systems for the principle, and they're going to get the principle downloaded into you, right? And so these drills, the drills are the delivery vehicle for the concepts. So whenever we're showing these flow drills and these sequences and these, this or that, is to get the principle and the concept across through you. And now you have the ability to actually train and drill and become more effective at controlling this person and become more effective at defending yourself. So that's kind of the way that we've been approaching it, and it seems to work really well. And it also lends itself to being able to develop the ability to continually be modified and be evolved, right?
Absolutely. No, that wasn't tangential at all. That was exactly what I was wanting from you. And it's funny, every time I record with someone, they always say, like, just to make it quick, or I don't want to talk your ear off, when really this time is to learn from you. Like, we're here to hear everything, as much detail as you want to put into it. It's perfect. So thank you for that. So I do want to kind of add, I did especially love, and I just want to put in here to be transparent, I did not get to train that second day at Knife Control Concepts because I did get sick, which is like an ongoing theme when I go training places. I just have really bad luck on the road. I don't know what I need to do, like maybe put a rabbit's foot on my keychain or something. Who knows? But I did like the first day at least. How balanced the class was. I didn't feel overwhelmed, but I also felt very more competent about knife control. Like once leaving, I did feel like I learned and got some muscle memory of the knife control concepts that were taught. And you all also have an online option that you get when you attend the course, correct? Do you want to kind of talk about that?
Yeah, that's where Mike and Aaron and I share a similar mentality as far as understanding that you're going to go to a seminar and hopefully what you're going to leave out of there with isn't proficiency in something itself, but at least enough mechanical ability to go back and repeat the moves to develop proficiency later, right? So whenever we do something like offer the companion course online to be able to go back and review, because while you might be able to get into a position and remember what it felt like and remember the details, you may not necessarily remember the specifics of it. So that online course is what's going to really give you the visual of being able to go back and see, oh, okay, that's what we did. That's where this happened from. That was the next move, whatever. So, and then, the thing too is it's not just an online companion video. It's an online companion course that's constantly updated. So there's new seminar footage put into it. There's more modules to train along with. There's actually a schedule broken down of it. And so it's one of, as far as being comprehensive as a course, I mean, you don't get more comprehensive than that. It's really like a beyond a master class in it because it's constantly being updated. So that was a really cool thing and a really cool idea. I think that Aaron, because he controls I guess like the learning management system behind it for the most part, and his crew like helped to update that. And then we just get together on the modules and of course the seminar footage. But yeah, that's I think that's what it's. If people go to a seminar and they pay whatever the price tag is, they're paying for the 2 hours or 5 hours or whatever many hours that they're going there, and they better pull away as much as they could from it. And a lot of places don't even let you take pictures or video, or I've been to seminars where they don't even want you taking notes. And
Really?
we're just kind of the opposite. We're like, we don't want you to walk away from here thinking that you learned something and then go and try to train it and screw it up, and then or try to worse yet show it to somebody and misrepresent it.
Right.
So we want you to have the best resources as possible. And more than anything, we want you to get the most usefulness out of this, the most effectiveness out of this. And the only way you're going to do that is to train it with precision as close as possible.
I really like the aspect of the online options just because of what you said. And also, I've oftentimes shown some of my closer friends a few moves from different, like varying seminars, and I've kicked myself for not having a video footage or notes on certain moves. So I love that we can have that at home once we attend. And I also just realized how much I didn't know about knife control once I showed up. I knew that I didn't know a lot about like how to move around someone like striking you in a forward stab, but this concept of actually controlling the opponent with their own body was so new to me. And just honestly, the whole time it was, besides being sick and I didn't realize it, I was constantly shocked at how much there was to it. And I loved learning from you all. I loved how balanced it was too. It wasn't like too much information in one day. I'm not sure if I already said that, but I definitely would like to go back and do the entire course this time because I enjoyed it a lot. And I loved meeting the people in that class. That was a lot of fun. I don't know if you got to listen to the episode with Aaron Janetti, but there were also so many funny moments in just that first day. So Yes, highly recommend that class to anyone looking to further their knowledge on knife defense and control. So, love that. I kind of wanted to go back, if you don't mind, to a little bit of the competition side. Oftentimes, I've heard from competitors that competing is kind of beneficial for practicing stress management in preparation for real life threatening situations. Would you agree with that, or would you have something else to say?
I think in my opinion, that's the most beneficial aspect of competing. That's the most important reason to compete. I never pushed a lot of my students to compete. I mean, I could recognize in somebody if they were going to make a good competitor, and I would try to train them accordingly. But for the most part, the only reason I ever really pushed anybody to compete, even if it's just one time, is because for most humans, a jiu-jitsu competition is going to be as close to a fight as they're ever going to get into, except for like on a playground. Most
Right.
most adults tend to avoid fights, and tend to not be attacked on the regular. So I mean, it's like, and the biggest benefit that you get out of training isn't self-defense, which sounds weird. The biggest benefit you get out of training self-defense is not self-defense, and you don't have to be into it for a long time to realize that. It's about stress inoculation. It's about stress management. It's like you were saying. It's about your ability to put yourself into a chaotic situation that simulates an even more chaotic situation. It's chaotic enough in a controlled environment, but it's extremely chaotic what you're simulating. So whenever you can do that, it tends to, in your brain, I think, like put things in perspective a little bit. The other things don't really. They're not as impactful. The other stresses in your life aren't quite as impactful whenever you can get yourself out of a situation that, even as a simulation, is an extremely more stressful, more dangerous situation. So, going back to the competition aspect, yes, I think that that's an extremely important. I don't know if it's a byproduct or main product of competition, getting out there, and because there's a lot that you don't take into consideration. It's like, you can have somebody that trains for a while, and if they haven't ever done a competition, they can be really good in the gym, and they can go in there and they can, like, be in the rolling portion of the class or open mats or whatever, and they can just really hold their own. They're cool as a cucumber. They're doing a great job. They're submitting some people. They're holding their own and defending against more advanced people. And then you throw them into their first competition, and all of a sudden there's these variables that were hard to account for, like, to some degree, your training partners are going to have your safety a little bit more at the forefront of their concern, more than this competitor who you're in their way of getting that gold medal. So they're going to grab a hold of you with bad intentions in a way that a lot of your training partners aren't going to. And while you may have more technical or more skilled or stronger or whatever training partners, it's a different energy. This is a complete stranger you've never touched before, and now they're getting a hold of you, and that's a different type of shock to your system. Then also the environment itself. There's probably a lot of people standing around watching you or sitting around watching. You're in a foreign environment. You're probably used to training on one, maybe two sets of mats for the bulk of your training, and now all of a sudden you're in a gymnasium or some kind of venue that you can't close your eyes and tell what's where. You can do that in your own gym, right? You can
Right.
say, okay, I know that like 20 feet that way is a water fountain. I know over there is that one poster on the wall. I know that the mat ends about 7 feet back that way. So when you get to a competition, you're like, shit, which way is like due north? So that's a factor that people don't think about a lot of the time. So all these things can cause you to have like an adrenaline dump. They can cause you to like overexert yourself, tire yourself out. And I tell people all the time, it's like you got to have the most efficient technique as possible, because it sucks to lose a fight to somebody that you're more technical than. It's just they beat you. You dumped your energy so fast, and they had more in the gas tank than you did. So they didn't have to be more technical. They just had to be technical enough to survive until you're too tired to make your technique efficient. So, I think that for all those reasons, the stress management aspect of competition is extremely invaluable, right?
Absolutely. Okay, we have it confirmed from Eli himself. So no, that's great to know. I love that. I say this on pretty much every episode, but I regret not competing. I told myself I was focused on the self-defense aspect and I just trained for self-defense. And really, I think I was just kind of chilling and I needed to take it maybe a little bit more seriously. And that's something I regret. So I try to, for the women that are kind of on, women and men, sorry, on the, I just mostly talk to women about this, but for anyone on kind of the verge of competing or, continuing their course and not competing, I like to kind of get those benefits out there so it can help them decide. So kind of shifting to women, I think that's why I said that earlier. If a woman were to kind of approach you and tell you they were interested in starting a martial arts system for self-defense, would you primarily point them towards jiu-jitsu?
Yes. Of course, I'm going to be biased,
Right.
but I think that, well, because here's kind of the premise of why I choose jiu-jitsu and why I think that it's good for particularly smaller, weaker people. But for anybody, honestly, it's just that the idea is this essentially. If I'm going to protect myself against somebody who just say wants to punch me in the face. Well, if they're bigger and stronger than I am, which I need to always assume they're going to be, because it doesn't really benefit me to only train for people that are more powerful than, right? So I want to assume the person who wants to beat me up is going to be more powerful, bigger, stronger, whatever. That person has to hit me less times than I have to hit them to be effective. So if I choose boxing, I choose kickboxing, I choose whatever, those are all fantastic things. But for me to become proficient enough to overcome a big size strength disparity takes longer in striking than it does in grappling. Because once in grappling, if we're putting together, like say, like a grappling formula, well, I want to stay far enough not to get hit. I want to stay far enough distance away from you so you can't hit me until, if that distance closes, I want to close it so much that we're too close for you to effectively hit me because you're not getting the trajectory and the distance of velocity that you need to make your strikes effective. Now, to control even better, to be able to put myself in even a safer zone, it benefits me to get the fight to the ground. Because once I'm on the ground, and multiple attackers, weapons, all that stuff aside, we're just talking one-on-one fight, attacker, trying to do something horrible to me. Once on the ground, there are positions that really mitigate the ability for you to maximize your power output, right? So, if say that I'm in the way that we establish a hierarchical dominance of positions on the ground is by seeing where can you generate explosive movement and where are you really at a hindrance to. Where can I control you with my limbs better than you can control me with yours because of just sheer access? How can I manipulate your structure and how can I keep you from manipulating mine? All these considerations start to come into the equation now. So the dominant or the superior positions that we try to always look for are the ones where your striking is not going to be as effective, or at least I can turn down the volume and mitigate the damage that you can do with your strikes. And positionally, I can control you better than you can control me, even if you are bigger and stronger. So that's something that's pretty unique, especially when you look at something like the guard position in jiu-jitsu. So, if we're really just, if we're going to be blatant or blunt about it, and we're talking about a woman wanting to protect herself from one of the scariest situations, which would be a sexual assault, then a lot of the positions in jiu-jitsu, which are why it's a little difficult for women to get involved a lot of the time, they're very intimate. And when your training partners are likely to be men in a typical gym, and which it's great because like more and more women are doing it, and so you do have that option now to train. Like Anya trains with 99% men all the time, so and she's perfectly comfortable with that, and she's my girlfriend. I should specify that she trains she trains with 99% dudes all the time, so it's rare that she even like gets to train with girls, but
Gotcha.
but if you can overcome that kind of barrier of like, oh man, especially if you have a history of any kind of like physical trauma or physical like abused or you were the victim of an attack or anything like that, that's very difficult for you to step in to the mats. And all of a sudden now it's like, oh, we're working this position where this dude's between my legs and he's trying to do this and I've got to, do this. And it's like, whew, that's a lot. That's a lot right out of the gate. So it's really important as, coaches really need to take that stuff in consideration. But it is going back several steps to what you're talking about. I think that for females, and you could lump in anybody who is at a perceived or actual physical disadvantage from the average physicality of a person, right? If I'm smaller than the average person, I'm weaker than the average person, I have some kind of disability or some kind of physical feature of me that isn't like a normal bodied person, then I think that I need all the advantages I can possibly get. And, whether or not there's a fallacious argument that gets brought up a lot of the time of like, well, taking the fight to the ground, there's all these liabilities in a fight. It's not an option, first of all. Sometimes it is. Hopefully it is an option. But if you're going to get attacked, conflict doesn't go up because we don't fly, right? Gravity is a real thing. So conflict travels inward until it goes to the ground. So the likelihood, and especially if you're talking about something like sexual assault, you're talking about anything like that, it's not going to remain standing, right? Just out of sheer clumsiness or because of deliberately taking it to the floor. Knowing how to operate in those certain positions and being able to navigate those and being able to reverse a lot of those positions. And not only that, but being able to take advantage of the fact that somebody that doesn't even recognize they're in a bad position. That the guard position is one of the most unique features of jiu-jitsu for that reason. We consider it to be a superior position, but you're on your back underneath somebody. The thing is, though, that you have to take into account is that they are inherently less stable than you are. You have more ability, if you know how to use it, to disrupt their structure because they're more vertical than you. You have infinite base. You can't fall anymore when you're in the guard. Like, you're done falling. You're on your back, and you have use of all four of your limbs. And they primarily have use of their arms and not their legs very effectively. So, you start to really, when you start to put things under the microscope like this, and you start to really quantify why things are like they are and why they're trained like they're trained, then yeah, I don't think that it's really, I don't think there's really a lot that you can say about other martial arts over jiu-jitsu or over, some kind of grappling like jiu-jitsu that would be more beneficial for that kind of situation.
That was incredible. I was speechless there for a second. I don't know if you can tell, it wasn't just the lag. Yeah, I've actually heard that before. Like, just
Okay.
Don't go to the ground then. Like, if you're afraid of groundwork, just don't go to the ground. It's like, oh, cool. Yeah, I forget. I can just pause, time and make that decision. So I love that you're kind of debunking that and bringing up that the reality of gravity, which is down. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. It's like it's so funny to me. It's always been kind of funny, I guess, or just weird to hear statements like that. It's like, don't do this in a fight, don't do that in a fight, don't let the fight, especially when it's like, don't let the fight get to this area. It's like, well, if you had that much control over where the fight went, why are you still in the fight? We're not talking about a sportive endeavor here. We're talking about parking lots. We're talking about an elevator. We're talking about, a bedroom. We're talking about, places that you didn't want to be, like, don't, if you only can control the fight if you can control the fight so well that you can keep it in positions you only want to be in, well, I got bad news for you. You're the attacker. You're not the victim in that situation. That's the only way that you're controlling it, because you're voluntarily putting the fight into a position that the other person doesn't want it to be in and that you want it to be in. It's like, okay, well, just kind of take it for what it is. Like, I don't know how much self-defense that is at that point,
Right.
So.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I love that. So true. So you kind of talked about your girlfriend you train with sometimes, and there's a video of you guys training on the beach, and it's so badass, so awesome. I showed my fiance, and I was like, "This is amazing." A couple goals right here. So would you like to kind of talk about what that's like, training with your partner regularly, or just being in a martial arts system, the balance that goes with that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. She's which first of all, she's even though she's smaller and I'm a little bit stronger, like she's been an athlete all her life, so she's got a lot of things about the way she trains and rolls and does things is like way better than me. I've just got experience and size. That's about it. But um, and so she's pretty amazing to me, not just because she's my girlfriend and I'm biased that way, but um, she is uh, training with her is is good because she is significantly smaller, right? Now it can be frustrating too because there's places that if we're fighting, I just want to like grab and pin and hold, and there are obviously places where I'm like, okay, I can't just like smash her right here because that's not beneficial for either one of us. That's not really me being technical, and it's also not being I guess a good training partner for sure for her either.
Right.
Now, just the sheer fact that she can move around with me, and just the sheer fact that she can move me and sweep me and get on my back and things like that, that's huge. Especially from a self-defense aspect, but from every endeavor, it's a big thing. And she's so learning, first of all, I guess, whenever, if we're talking about kind of being able to train with your significant other, um, for the advice, I can't advise girls on guys, but like I can advise guys with girls, like how you train with your girlfriend or your spouse or your significant other whenever they are substantially smaller than you probably have a significant strength advantage over them. That's your time to really be technical. For the most part with me, I try with big dudes, I try to muscle big dudes. With smaller people in general, I try to take as much physical attribute out of it as possible, except for maybe flexibility, because that's the only one I'll hang on to. Like, because I don't have a lot of it anyway, but
Gotcha.
I'm keeping that. But I will like I will try not to just smash them, pin them, hold them, and everything like that. Now, I'll say try not to, because there are times that, with training, because I do have the experience thing, and I try not to pull the coach card because that can turn into an argument really fast. But
Right, right.
I do, if I do want to be beneficial as the bigger person in training with somebody, then I can give them some size. I can give them some heaviness over here and make them realize, okay, how are you going to efficiently move this whenever I got 60 pounds on you, I've got 70 pounds on you. You've got to work around this. You got to figure this out. You, um, you know, I will show them that they're going to have their leverage has to be that much on point to be able to get this arm lock, because I can, muscle out of it in a way that I couldn't do against somebody my size or bigger. So, there are those things, but you have to kind of figure out um, kind of a training modality of how we can have a good give and take, how we can be good true partners in training without it just being me giving things up or her having to make concessions on different things because of the size disparity. We want to keep it as neutral and as flowing and as normal as possible, and for the most part we're able to, because she's slick, she's fast, and she's dangerous with a lot of things, and so I've got to be very aware, and if I slip up, then I'm going to get caught up. So it's not something where I'm using kid gloves all the time. We take each other to task, but it's always with pretty good intentions and everything. So I'm obviously I'm not going to roll with her the way that I'm going to roll with a 180-pound guy, but I do want to roll in a way that I can work on technique and she can work on technique, and I can figure out how to develop a little bit more precision and finesse on my technical portion, but then she also does, but she also gets to, do that and work on size disparities and everything too. So it's a lot of fun. That can be I think it can be a very good practice. So I think the tricky part that I see and bad practices that I see of especially guys rolling with girls is that you get one extreme or the other. You get guys that will just um, go overly delicate when they don't have to. And that's very frustrating to Anya because I talked to her a lot about this stuff too. So and she's a good one to talk to about it because it's one extreme or the other. It's like either it's like, oh, it's a girl. I got to be very tentative. I got to be careful and like overly, which there's a place for some of that, but not to this extreme. Or they just see like, oh, she's a blue belt or she's a purple belt or she's a this or she's a that or she's been training longer, and or it's like, well, I don't want to feel like I'm sexist or something by going easy, so I'm just going to go balls out and just try to smash this person, or I'm stronger, so I'm going to pin them down, or
Right.
or like I said, she's a purple belt, so a blue belt dude that has 50 pounds on her is going to he just wants like that trophy of saying he tapped a purple belt. He's going to leave out the fact that it was a 50-pound smaller female. He's
Right.
leave that part out, but he's going to tell all his friends how he smoked this purple belt at open mat. So it's not. I don't think that those are. I think those are a little bit more the exception than the rule. But those are horrible practices I see with guys that don't intelligently and ethically roll with people that are not their physical equal or superior.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Part of the reason this podcast was started was to bring topics like this to the surface, to really talk about them. I often tell my girlfriends that join jiu-jitsu to avoid the white belt guys, to go roll with upper belts. They just have more experience and they're over their ego phase usually, depending, I can't speak for everyone, but right. Yes, I definitely put that disclaimer out there. The last question I have for you today, and I just want to put out before I say this, you all, for those of you listening, Eli has playlists on his YouTube that are kind of organized into several topics that I wish I would have had when I was training jiu-jitsu consistently, from, jiu-jitsu injury issues and the physiology of jiu-jitsu, along with street-based jiu-jitsu. So if you guys are interested in those topics, please go there and utilize his resources, subscribe to his channel, become a Patreon, and just really, really utilize him as a jiu-jitsu resource, man. I really wish I would have known. I think I was just nervous to go to YouTube. There's so much out there, but you can trust Night Jiu-Jitsu. So the last
thank
question
you. I appreciate that.
Of course. Thank you for coming on the show, man. The last question I have for you today is one I've asked a few times on the show, and I always like to hear what, kind of the varying responses. And that's, do you normally recommend women start in women's only classes? Or would you say they could start in those classes and then eventually branch out to men and women? What's your opinion on that?
Man, it's a good question because, and it's not a simple one to answer because,
of course,
everybody is different. And first of all, like everybody, period, started classes. It takes so much, and this is something that as an instructor, it's crucial to remind yourself a lot of the time. Is remember how difficult it is to take that first step in. You get the occasional person, you get a lot of people that will come in, they're just excited to start and they want to, start from scratch. But for a lot of people, it's difficult, And so when you're talking about, like somebody like Anya, I'm sure she had her. I don't want to speak out of turn, but like she had a background of athletics. She had a background of competition. She had, she's an athlete in a great shape and, has a great temperament for martial arts and fighting stuff, fighty stuff is what we call it. That's why my shirt. So.
Yes.
but she has the temperament for it. So, somebody like that versus somebody who is, say, fresh off of a traumatic experience and is starting because they don't want to go through that experience again. They want to know what they can possibly, or they want to put every measure in place to be better prepared for if that ever happens again. So those are, and again, I don't want to speak out of turn. I know that, there's lots of different factors, but those are going to be, somebody like Anya can go right into a class with like all dudes, whereas that might be extremely triggering for somebody who's fresh off, like 6 weeks ago had a horrible assault encounter or something, So I couldn't necessarily recommend that, But what I would say though, and this is almost advice that almost anybody can take, before starting anything, watch classes. Go into a place that they should allow you to sit and watch a class or some classes. They should allow you a trial class. You should be able to meet with the instructor or instructors one-on-one and see what services they offer. Do they even offer women's only classes? First of all, and maybe that's a good setting for you if you are a female and you want to go into all women's classes, and then eventually maybe you want to transition into co-ed classes, or maybe not. Maybe you want to stay with your girlfriends in there, and that's perfectly great. And you're gonna you can still develop be a killer in that class, just like if you were going into all dudes classes. So that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go into co-ed classes to improve. So there's a lot of things like that. And I think that you should meet with instructors of the place that you're going to be training, or the coaches. You should watch what the environment is like and pick up on that vibe, and see what kind of community they've fostered inside that environment. So do your homework more than anything, even before you step into the place to talk to them or to watch a class, so that you don't have to deal with an initial sales pitch right away if it's the wrong environment. We've got this wonderful thing called Google now, where you can do your homework, and don't go too far down the rabbit hole, because you can look up and see somebody with this background or this lineage or whatever, and be like, oh, okay, I don't really know exactly what that means. So now I'm going to start Googling their instructor, and then their instructor, and then it's like, oh, well, this lineage over here was adjacent to this background over here that was this, and then they were involved in the scandal back in 1987, and it's like, don't do all that stuff,
right.
So, but the biggest thing, look it up, see if it looks professional, go to it, make sure it's not in a dilapidated strip mall that's next to a crack house. It's so walk in, talk to the instructor, set up a time to be able, and what we used to do for years and years. I recently just moved to North Carolina, but I was in Kentucky all my life for all those years. And what we did was we did a 2-part introduction. We didn't have to do a 2-part introduction class. So when you sign up for your intro, the intro consisted of a one-on-one lesson with an instructor for usually about half an hour, 20 to 30 minutes. And then the second portion of it was your first group class. And that was your intro. That way you get to sample both environments. You get to have the attention of a one-on-one instruction. And then you also get to experience the group class, and it was optional if you wanted to do that, but it gave you kind of both if you didn't know which was going to be better for you. But yeah, I think that's the main advice that I would give for something like that. I was a little long-winded for a simple question, but
that's wonderful to know. No, I appreciate you going into that depth. This is the type of thing that I want all women and men to know. This is wonderful. Well, those are all the questions I have. Is there anything you'd like to kind of send the listeners off with before we end the episode?
No, most of the videos that I have out, if I'm going to plug anything, I would say most of the instructional. I don't put a ton of stuff up on YouTube that's self-defense oriented these days.
Okay.
I don't like dealing with those comments compared to if I just put up more stuff that's a little bit more provable in grappling competition, So, but having said that, most of the instructionals that I have, like with BJJ Fanatics and Effective Self-Defense and things like that, and then the deep dive with the Budo Brothers, they are more self-defense oriented. So if anybody's interested in looking up any of the stuff like that, then I would steer them toward BJJ Fanatics for my instructionals. I've got, like you said, I've got Patreon where I put up a lot of my classes and seminar footage. But that's all the real stuff that I have to plug for the most part. And YouTube, of course, if still go watch me on YouTube.
Wonderful. Yes. And all of those resources will be linked in the show notes, which are the notes below the episode title. So everyone, please go check that out. Is that all you wanted to say? I want to make sure I'm not cutting you off. I just want to make sure I put in that your information.
No, that's it. I'm happy to be on here, and I appreciate the conversation. I had a great time talking about it, and so I appreciate any time that I'm given the platform to have these discussions, because I could talk about this stuff forever, and especially whenever it's with somebody who's like very open and receptive, and all that. So I thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you so much for that, and yes, thank you for giving me your time today, and the listeners your time. This is such an insightful episode. I can't wait to put more kind of like reels out there on kind of like excerpts from this discussion to kind of highlight some areas of it. And yeah, it's always nice talking to you. Probably the most humble person I've literally ever met, but yes. So thank you so much for coming on today. For exclusive video content with the guest speakers, I'm going to put some excerpts up on social media, but for the full time, you can become a Patreon. You'll receive thank you notes, podcast stickers, and more exclusive content. You can visit She Shield on Instagram and TikTok for show updates at She Shield Pod. You can also see guest speaker pictures and some podcast highlights. Thank you to Sagetta Gear, the official sponsor of She Shield. For any concealed carry gear and duty gear, you can use code SheShield10 for 10% off your Sagetta Gear order and to support the pod. That's SHESHIELD, the number 10 for 10% off. All sources mentioned will be in the show notes. And if you like the pod, you can help by liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. Thank you for listening. In the meantime, stay safe and stay vigilant. Bye.